Welcome back to Dark Cinema Recaps. Today we're going to be carrying on the Scream movie franchise, covering 1997's Scream 2, which I originally said was 1999, which was a big mistake because this came out literally the next year after Scream. Scream was so popular that they just kind of forced the next one out the door. And personally, I loved the first half of the film. I hate the second half of the film. I personally think it needed more time.
Yeah. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. In the Stab movie, the film within a film, who played Casey Becker? Let us know in the comments and we'll give you the answer at the end. But we'll see if you're right.
Okay, Sidney and Randy are now attending Windsor College less than a year after the Woodsboro murders took place. They see news reports that a couple was murdered in a movie theatre at a preview of the Stab movie, which was based on the book by Gail Weathers about the Woodsboro murders. Phil Stevens is stabbed through the head through the wall of a bathroom cubicle. The killer then enters the cinema and sits next to Maureen Evans, and she assumes the killer is simply her boyfriend wearing a mask.
During the Casey Becker kill scene in the film Stab, the crowd goes wild. Taking advantage of this, the killer stabs Maureen multiple times. Seriously wounded and dying, she climbs up the stairs in front of the movie screen and lets out one final cry.
That's like a banshee cry as well, my god.
As the crowd realises she isn't faking, she falls down dead. Soon Sidney and Randy realise the nightmare is still all starting over again. Gail arrives to seek fame again, which she already has in abundance because of the events of Woodsboro, and because she is also worried about the second killing spree.
Dewey also arrives on the campus to try and help protect Sidney. Once again, in the rules scene, Randy and Dewey discuss the fact that anyone could be the killer. During the course of this discussion, Randy continues the job of explaining the rules of a horror movie.
There are rules!
And this time, rules of a sequel. Cece Cooper, a sorority girl and vampire slayer, is the next victim.
While alone at her sorority house, Cece is threatened by the killer over the phone, before the killer attacks her inside the house. Cece runs upstairs where she throws a potted plant and a bike at the killer, who puts a bike on the stairs.
That is a crazy moment.
Cece is chased to the top floor, where the killer throws her through the balcony doors. He then stabs her in the back twice, before throwing her over the third-storey balcony to her death.
This is where the film goes downhill for me. I mean, killing Buffy? Like, come on!
It's that chase. It's always a chase scene up the stairs, though.
Sarah Michelle Gellar had a wild year as well, because she was in I Know What You Did Last Summer as well. Buffy was starting.
She was in so many different things.
And then she gets killed by the second worst Ghostfaces, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose 2 out of 3 ain't bad. After the police discover the body, the students at the nearby Martini Mixer go over to investigate, leaving Sidney and her boyfriend Derek at the Delta Lambda Zeta house. Try saying that 10 times. The killer attacks Sidney, but Derek appears and helps Sidney escape before he charges into the house himself. He's slashed on the arm, but the wound is not serious. In the confusion, the killer escapes, and also made himself look very guilty.
At the police headquarters, Gail and Dewey notice that the names of the new victims loosely match the 3 first victims from Woodsboro. Maureen Evans matches Maureen Prescott. Cece Cooper matches Casey Becker. And Phil Stevens matches Stephen Oath. The police chief assigns 2 detectives to protect Sidney from any further attempts on her life. Later, Sidney is in the school theatre rehearsing for the play Cassandra, when the killer attacks through the mass chaos in one of the scenes. Although it is not clear if this is simply a figment of Sidney's imagination or not.
Randy is the next victim. The group's outside on the campus lawn amongst a dozen of college students enjoying the fine weather. The killer telephones and taunts them, claiming he can see them from where he is. Gail and Dewey search the dozen or so students in the area with mobile phones, trying to quickly reveal if any of them is the killer. Randy is also looking around whilst talking to the killer on the phone. He's trying to stall the killer in order to help Gail and Dewey find him. While he's outside cameraman Joel's van, Randy is unexpectedly pulled into the van and stabbed to death, before his body is soon discovered by Joel, Gail, and Dewey.
Officer Andrews and Officer Richards, the detectives who were assigned to protect Sidney, are attacked while their vehicle is stopped at traffic lights. The shittest detectives ever. One of the detectives tries to shoot the killer while on the hood of the car. The killer deliberately crashes the car, killing the detectives and knocking the killer unconscious. Gail and Dewey become involved with the killer, resulting in Dewey being stabbed and seriously wounded. Sidney and Hallie, Sidney's roommate, narrowly escape the wreckage of the car crash by squeezing past the unconscious killer in the front seat. Once out of the car, Sidney debates whether to remove the killer's mask or not, and decides to, but when she returns to find the killer is gone. She then turns around only to see Hallie being stabbed by the killer.
Sidney runs to the school theatre, where she is confronted by the killer once more. The killer reveals himself to be Mickey. You know, Mickey, who we haven't seen from like half the film, barely mentioned this whole time. The last time we saw him, he was doing a dance in the canteen. Yeah. That Mickey. Her new boyfriend's best friend. Sidney finds her boyfriend Derek tied up to a stage prop, and Mickey then shoots Derek in the chest. Mickey is also revealed to have had a partner. Sidney turns around to see Gail coming out of the stage door, leading her to believe that Gail is the other killer. Gail and Mickey shake their heads as a nope, and Debbie Salt comes out holding the other cop's gun. Sidney recognizes her as Mrs. Loomis, the mother of Sidney's previous boyfriend, Billy. Weak ass reveal. Like, yeah. I'm digging the Pamela Voorhees vibe that we've kind of got going, but
it didn't really make a lot of sense because
the ending to Scream 2 is so bad.
Mickey reveals that it was his plan all along to be caught for the murders and to become infamous and immortalized by the media. He wanted to blame the violent killings on horror movies and the effects of cinema violence in society.
He met Mrs. Loomis on a Psycho website, and she agreed to fund his college tuition in return for his part in the killings. She also helped Mickey place calls to the victims. Mrs. Loomis' motive for killing Sidney and her friends was revenge for Sidney having killed her son. However, Sidney points out to her that if she had not abandoned Billy prior to this, then Billy and Stu Macher wouldn't have started the killing spree in the first place, which is obviously the events from the first film.
Mrs. Loomis shoots Mickey, removing him as a potential threat, and stating that it was intended legal defense was absurd anyway, and that no one would have believed it. Mickey is shot, he reflexively shoots Gail, causing her to fall off stage.
Sidney's cornered by Mrs. Loomis and tricks her momentarily into believing that Mickey's still alive, and when Mrs. Loomis is distracted, Sidney hits her in the face with a prop jaw. Sidney fights back and barricades herself backstage, where she presses various stage buttons, ultimately causing the front of the stage to collapse on Mrs. Loomis. It's barely light rocks. This ending scene is just, oh my god, so bad. Mrs. Loomis survives because she got attacked by pillows. It gets Sidney in an arm lock. However, Cotton, the man Sidney initially blamed for killing his mother, arrives and takes Mickey's gun.
Mrs. Loomis tries to convince Cotton to kill Sidney, but Cotton chooses to shoot Mrs. Loomis instead, revealing he never intended to hurt Sidney. Sidney and Cotton discover that Gail is wounded but alive, and they help her. Mickey suddenly jumps up dramatically, and Gail and Sidney shoot him multiple times. Then Sidney turns around and decides to shoot Mrs. Loomis in the head, just in case. It is then revealed that despite his ordeal, Dewey survived his stabbing. He is wheeled out on a gurney and taken away in an ambulance. Gail decides to ride with him in the ambulance to the hospital. It turns out that Dewey's scar tissue from the previous stabbing in his back prevented the latest stabbing from being fatal.
Sidney and Cotton walk out from the school, and the media jump Sidney, questioning her about her ordeal, wanting a scoop of news. But Sidney turns her attention to Cotton, saying that he's the one that they should be talking to. She then walks across the college campus.
And if you remember at the beginning of the video, we asked you who played Casey Becker. The answer is Heather Graham.
Now, I don't know about you, but Dewey has got some serious plot armor.
I do not get how he's survived
because Wes Craven loves him, and from the first one, he was originally meant to die, and they just decided not to because everybody just loves David Arquette.
Yeah, but how many characters could they really do that to? Are we going to go back and we're going to have Randy coming back?
I'm still annoyed that's what happened to Cece. But, right, Scream 2. I don't think it's the worst, because this franchise gets worse before it gets better.
Yeah, it does. It's not the worst, it's just a very, very loose thread for the killers to even remotely be doing the killing.
I love the first part of the film. I think going up to where Cece gets taken off the balcony, I think it's great. And then you have all the things that we kind of barely touched over. The stupid canteen scene where they're dancing and singing.
And the Cotton, like, back and forth with Cotton saying that he could be the
killer. They had moments where he kind of like, he was just like sneaking up on her around the corner and stuff like that because he wanted to get interviews. And
that's that extra
that is Scream.
Bit.
That's what Scream does. They like to have that whodunit thing.
Yeah, but it just made no sense because at the end of the last one, we'd already seen that she didn't want the fame from it. She never wanted the fame. So he was the one that he was going to have that fame.
The only thing Sidney doesn't want is her insides to be outside. And that's all we've kind of accomplished.
She wants to be left alone and go to college.
That's it. She just like wants to be left alone. Like Colin wants a camera in his face. She's like, no, but still they keep fucking hunting her down.
Yeah.
And
that says more about the media.
Well, that is a very good point. But yeah, it's decent. Like I said, the first half's great. The second half, it just falls off a cliff massively. But next week, we have the worst Scream. And oh my goodness, I'm going to butcher that in a big way because that was meant to be a lot different than how it came out. But nonetheless, that was the Scream 2 recap, and we'll be back next week for Scream 3.